Welcome to the Lighten Up podcast with Lauren Polly, your invitation for living on the lighter side of life. I'm Lauren Polly, and I am delighted you have chosen to join me today for episode 190. Pruning, cutting out the old to make room for the new. I want to chat today about this amazing creative energy and kind of practice that we can put into play to be able to make space for what it is we actually desire. Sometimes it does take a little bit of pruning or cutting out the old, and there's so many things that come involved in that process. I think being honest with yourself about what's not working, being able and willing to let go a bit, and also not judging yourself that you have failed at something or that something's not working quite like you desire it to. All these things really come into play. And I think this is a great time of year to actually talk about this. If you look around nature right now, they are pruning the tree back, at least here in California, that's what they're doing. I was walking down the street the other day, and these normally beautiful, beautiful, beautiful trees and rose bushes were like butchered. And it was fascinating to walk by them, and the energy, the reaction it brought up in me was like, oh my God, they cut off all that beautiful stuff. And deep, deep down, I know, well, they cut off what was old to be able to let it grow bigger and better and more bountiful. It actually helps the health and the vitality of the trees and the plants when they do that. And I just kind of realized, wow, how many people actually have that reaction when they go to prune their life. I'm talking relationships, I'm talking businesses, I'm talking creative projects, even just self-care routines. How often do those things become stale? And after a while, they're not really creating the same energy for you and your body anymore. But that initial, oh my God, that comes up when you see what was chopped back and stripped back is quite assaultive to the senses. So I just like to kind of preface this conversation where, yes, in your mind, you may know that pruning is necessary sometimes. Being honest and looking at something and saying, you know what, you lived a good life, but you're no longer serving me, time to trim you out, is sometimes cognitively, of course, kind of conversation to have, but at the same time, you may have a lot of those reactions to it too. So kind of take a stock of your life right now, take a little glimpse of it. What are the things in there? What are the elements of your living that feel stale, that have stopped actually growing, that have stopped creating? Or maybe way back in the day felt fun and generative and just aren't that anymore for you. Get a sense of those things, either the relationships, the creative projects, your job, what have you. And you have to kind of like Maria Kondo it, you know what I mean? Actually ask, is this actually bringing you joy these days? Or has it kind of added just to the clutter of your life? Has it moved into the maintenance mode where you're just kind of pushing it along because you think you have to push it along because heaven forbid you let it go? Or have you not even paid attention to it recently enough to be able to hear that it has dissipated in its creative energy? Get really present with that and start to be honest with yourself here. When you look at pruning that thing, that relationship, that job, that whatever, what comes up? If you are going to take the saw and cut back the tree, in your mind, knowing it's for greater growth and creating space for something new, what comes up for you? A lot of people will get stuck in that fear of failure thing of like, wow, I put so much time, I put so much energy and resources in that. To trim it out now or to cut it out completely, what a waste of time. What a waste of money. And before you know it, those kind of inner thoughts of, wow, I failed here at this thing that wanted to get created comes up. Personally, I've been through this big time in my business creation over the last couple of years. There have been many things that I have gotten pulled into and kind of had such a fun, delicious, creative energy to it. I've put a lot of resources in. A lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of energy, and either those things never took off, as happens a lot in business, or they took off for a little bit, and then from my perspective, it would have been a longer term project, maybe something that was more sustainable. And it turned out not to be that. It was something that popped and then kind of went away. And it was really interesting just in my own personal practice of trimming and pruning, how often this failure thing came up and this inner judgment that, oh, wow, I must have done something wrong here. Otherwise, that thing would still be here and would still be thriving. So take a peek for yourself when you look at those things that you're kind of feeling that stagnation energy on. When you look at pruning them, how much of that inner judgment comes up? How much of that kind of, oh goodness, that actually is admitting defeat or admitting failure if I let it go? Well, what if you challenge that perspective? What if you aren't failing, but what if you're getting called to something new? What if that project didn't fail? What if it created exactly what it was meant to create? And now it's just time for something new and different. And what if that energy, even if you do let it go, continues to lead on into future developments? I think sometimes we get so linear with these kind of creations, and yes, business, absolutely, but sometimes relationships too, where if this thing is going to be a success, quote unquote, I'm going to plant the seed, I'm going to grow it, and it's just going to keep on growing. When we look at pruning it back or kind of cutting it off of the tree of our life as a whole, we sometimes go, wow, that is admitting defeat and admitting failure. And if I had done something better, it would have just kept going. We don't look at it from a nonlinear perspective where sometimes just the act of engaging with something creative, engaging with a relationship that's new and different, engaging with a business or a job, even for just a couple years, is enough to teach us something. It's enough to facilitate something in us. It's enough to add something to our living. And then we're off to bigger and better. We're off to something different. What if this whole creative conversation about creating your life isn't an A to B equals C, but is something that is more nonlinear, kind of like the natural world? You know, they do prune that one tree back to be able to grow the exact kind of tree, but how often do they plow the fields or nature takes its course where fire comes and burns everything and new generative growth comes after that? These aren't places to actually start judging yourself. They're just places to ask more questions and become more clear. Because that was the big thing that came up for me when I looked at that tree down this beautiful street that's normally lush and gorgeous and had this big, oh my God, that they took everything off of it. It's bare, it's stripped down. And I just looked at how often we do that with our lives when things aren't working out, quote unquote, the way they think that they should. Inner judgment comes, fear of failure comes, and admitting defeat comes up. What if it's not? What if you're just being called to something new? And what if this act of pruning actually created more leading forward in the future? I think the second conversation to bring in here, once you look at the things in your life that are desiring some pruning, you get past the self-judgment, you get past this, oh, it should have been better, and I probably messed it up somehow. What if it's not? The second conversation is really the potency and the power to let it go. And I think this is so hard for so many of us. It's like you've planted your seeds, you've grown this beautiful tree, it's lush, it's gorgeous, and at the same time, you know deep down, 'tis the season to cut it back. 'Tis the season to cut it out. And for some reason, it's almost this like, if I do and I let it go, the fear comes in that there's nothing going to be coming to actually replace it, to grow anew, or something better to even come along. This fear of, I have a relationship right now, it may not be the best relationship, may not be the most fun relationship, but at least I have one. So if I prune it, if I cut that out, there's now a vacuum in my life. What if that never gets fulfilled again? Same thing when you have a money or a business thing coming up, when you have something that's just good enough, you can totally keep going. At least you have something. We get so afraid of letting go and having that vacuum effect. But that vacuum effect actually does create a lot. There's a lot of research out about it, actually. If you get on Google, the vacuum effect is basically clearing things out to such a degree that you have a vacuum of space. You have a vacuum of time, a vacuum of energy. And what that's doing, it's really letting yourself, your living, the universe know, look, I'm asking for something new here. And not only am I asking for something new, I'm creating enough space for it to actually get planted and grow. Sometimes there may be a bit of a vacuum when you do prune and you actually take the step to let go. What if instead of fearing that, you just know it for what it is? You're creating space. You're living with space to actually invite something new to start growing. It's like that tree that gets pruned. If no one did prune it, it wouldn't grow as dynamically. It also would run out of room. It would get smushed up against the other things around it. There isn't a vacuum. There isn't some space for it to actually continue to grow. And with that, you hurt the health of it. The organism of it actually starts to dissipate in its creative and generative ability. Same exact thing with our relationships, our creative projects in our life. Creating the vacuum can be very assaultive, like I said at the beginning of the show. When you see that tree pruned back and stripped bare, it can feel very, very assaultive to your senses. Knowing that you're not failing, knowing that you didn't do anything wrong, also knowing that, look, I'm creating space here. I'm creating a vacuum effect, and inevitably, that vacuum effect will take place. That space will get filled, and I have full and total choice on what it gets filled with. Pruning is an amazing practice to really get comfortable with. It will feel uncomfortable to do, but if you get comfortable with the uncomfortableness of it, it's actually a highly creative and healthy practice to have. It is something where you can do it in a very practical way with the things in your life. Decluttering is a great way people use this. It's a great thing to do with relationships, people who are no longer serving you. People where the relationship has gotten flat and stale, where there's not a creative energy anymore, or you're not really supported, perhaps you never were, starting to prune those out, starting to create a vacuum effect and actually asking for more generative, fun people to come into your life. Perhaps in your business, a certain arm of that business isn't actually growing anymore. And because you're living off memories of the old, you keep pumping away at it, but it's actually not so. Create a vacuum effect, prune it back, and actually see what wants to be birthed next. There are many different ways to play with this conversation. My big 2 today for you to take home and play with is not to get lost in the judgment of it. Not to get lost in the linearity of, I grew that, it must keep growing. That's when the judgment comes in. Start to be grateful for what it did create when it was generative. Be grateful for its presence in its life, for how long it was here. Don't judge yourself for the fact that it's changing, because that's just what nature does. That's what life does. It just changes. And truly, what if you aren't failing? What if you're just getting called to something different? We don't give ourselves enough bandwidth and play with that. And tool number 2 to really play with is this fine art of letting go, this fine art of becoming comfortable with the uncomfortableness of the vacuum effect. Allowing your schedule to be a little bit more spacious, allowing yourself maybe to get a bit bored, allowing yourself to walk away from what's no longer serving you and settling for that, but creating enough space and really truly getting conscious with your questions of, I'm asking for something more to come fill in this gap. It is a confronting practice, I get it, but the more you do it, the more comfortable with it you will become, and hopefully the more generative you'll be in all aspects of your life and your living. Have an amazing week playing with this. Again, you can always reach out to me at lauren@laurenpolly.com. Let me know how this goes. Enjoy the beautiful pruning season. I'm so excited to hear what it will create for you in your life. Have an amazing week, and as always, I will chat with you next Tuesday.